Every framing project starts in the same place, where wood meets concrete. That's called a sill plate, and it runs along the top of the whole foundation wall. Now, in a conventional house, there's not a lot of air sealing done here. It's just a thin gasket that sits between the plate and the top of the foundation wall. In a passive house, it's a much bigger deal and there are a lot more steps. On day one of construction, the first thing I noticed was that the site had not been backfilled. There was a lot of rain in the days preceding, so the excavators were not able to get in and finish the job. The conditions were less than ideal, but the builders wanted to stay on schedule. How much were the site conditions a factor in the speed of this project?
Well, normally when you show up on site to start from the foundation, do the mud sill, everything is backfilled, everything is nice and graded. In this case, when we showed up, it hadn't been backfilled yet, so instead of working at knee level, we were more working at chest level, which, doesn't help production at all.
The other thing I noticed was that the brick shelf, which I'm used to seeing on the outside edge of the wall, was actually facing inward. This detail was designed to give support to the concrete slab and to create a path for the rigid insulation from under the slab to integrate with the insulation above in the wall cavity. To maximize the amount of insulation at this juncture, the top of the stem wall was poured 5.5 inches wide, just enough to carry the 2x6 wall framing. Did Steve's narrow foundation wall detail cause any problems with laying out the plates?
We had to attach offset lines on the outside in order to make sure everything was straight and square and take our measurements off of that. And of course, if you do a 2-inch offset straight line, you have to just add or subtract 2 inches depending on where the line is. So it did make it more difficult in that we weren't able to snap lines. Setting up an offset line obviously takes longer.
So day one on this job, which is the first day we got here, you were pretty hands-on. Is that typical for you as a general contractor?
Well, I'm always on site. In this particular house, I was hands-on, and I'd never done a passive house, as I said, and I saw the mud sill as being a really intricate part for no air leakage. So I wanted to do it myself, all the Trimco sealant, and make sure that it was right, because you can't go back.
What were your first impressions when you got on site?
First impression was it looked pretty basic, but looking at the plans, studying the plans, we knew there was a lot more detail to, even getting started. Instead of 2 steps, which would be the sill seal and the PT 2x6, it was like 4 steps. So starting out, we knew it was going to be more difficult, but we had really no idea how it was going to go together until we actually started.
Right down the middle, Steve?
Yeah, hold to the outside. Hold to the outside and go around each bolt. Just continuous is the key, man.
Why is the mud sill one of the most critical components of a passive house?
Like any detail, it has its complications. There's a lot of things that have to come together. Water management issues, any health concerns or environmental responsibility. There's durability issues, as well as air leakage. Air leakage is certainly a big component given that it's a passive house, but I'm trying to make this house more relevant than just an energy bunker. I want it to be able to stand here for 100 or 200 years and still be relevant in that time. And so when I sit down at my drafting table, a lot of years of experience come in there. And I'm fortunate to have a lot of experience in seeing building failure, so I know what didn't work. So I couple that with what could potentially work and develop this detail into hopefully what I consider a good success.
Setting aside the pre-construction meeting you had with the whole team of builders, did you get the sense on day one that these guys had any idea what they were walking into?
No, not really. These guys come out, they know we're putting some wood together, we're playing with caulk guns, we're doing what we typically do, but they don't understand the level of conscientiousness that plays into putting a passive house in. That, while you're playing with wood and cutting and doing your saws, you're getting really particular about how these details get put together and making sure that we get a continuous bead of caulk, that it doesn't kind of taper to nothing and then grow into the next bead, that it is in fact continuous.
You were here from the first day of building. Is that typical for the architect?
I try and make it out here on all the milestones, and I consider putting the mud sill down. That's the first contact I have with the framer. So I come out here, spend an hour or two with him. We get that first 4 or 6 feet right on the mud sill, so he knows what I expect for the next 180 feet.
So it's really your way of coming out to make sure that he understands the way you've drawn the plans.
Yeah, it's kind of a mutual education. I don't want him to think that I'm some inspector general that, hey, it's my way or the highway, or you guys are screwing this up like you always do. That's not the case. It's a mutual understanding, and projects like this are total teamwork. I value their education and their experience as much as they value my knowledge. And we couple those together, and that's how we get success.
Is it typical to have the architect on site with you, or day one of the actual building?
Depending on how complex the project is, the architect will maybe show up once a month. Very uncommon to see him there once a week or even multiple days in a row. So it was different having him, hands-on. We've never really had an architect hands-on before. Steve was definitely there, working with us.
The assembly begins with a continuous bead of acoustical sealant, followed by a layer of 6 mil poly, a second bead of acoustical sealant, a copper termite shield, an EPDM gasket, and a pressure-treated 2x6 that's bolted in place.
Probably want to go at least to the bolt on the turn on both sides. Well, I guess we can pick that one up later with the poly. Charlie, you might want to do a little test. Grab that termite shield and find out what's good to cut it. And then that'll kind of force it when we put the termite shield for that stuff to go that way instead of coming this way. We got to make sure we're getting the right, we don't want to be, and it barely sits like a quarter of an inch over the foundation, Charlie. We don't want an inch or two. I said it's important to kind of squeegee out that excess that we ran the circle around the bolt. We'll still put some more on there, but yeah, we'll have some. When that sealant starts squeezing out between the materials, that means we're getting some really good continuity under there. Yeah, and just kind of squeeze that in that, put some pressure and get that right in there.
It was nice having the architect there because he knew what he wanted to accomplish. Having him work with us, it's not common, but it was good to have him there. Once we got through the first day and he wasn't there, we actually came up with some better ideas of how to get more productive with the assembly of all the different layers. Instead of doing everything in place, we did like a 16-foot assembly of the 2x6, the poly, and the termite shield. And then we applied the gasket to the bottom of the PT 2x6, and we were able to drop 16-foot sections on as opposed to doing just the poly, then just the termite shield, then just the 2x6. It seemed faster when we did it all in one assembly.
I got to imagine on a regular house that the architect doesn't show up very often either. How did you feel about having him on site so often?
A lot of my clients do hire the architect to stay on board because there's a lot of changes, and they add things and architects can draw on the spot. So I'm used to having architects around. Steve's a little bit different. It was a passive house. I had a lot of questions. I hadn't done one, so I loved having him around.
And how much did you defer to Steve's experience?
Well, in a lot of areas, I deferred to him, wholeheartedly because I hadn't done it. But I had done aspects of it. Things like Trimco underneath the sill plate. I had never done it, so, he showed me how to do it. Continuous, no breaks, continuous, no breaks, continuous. I mean, it was a lot. I went through twice as much Trimco as I would have thought.
There are a lot of products in the market for air sealing a mud sill, so why did you choose acoustical sealant?
Well, the beauty of acoustical sealant is that it never really changes from its initial form. It stays that pliable, gooey mess that upon installation, it stays like that for the rest of its life. It never dries, hardens, shrinks, cracks. So I'm not at the risk of, while I passed the test today, the air leakage test, in 5 years, I'm going to have this house full of air leaks because the stuff shrunk up and dried away and turned to dust.
The Tremco, it's not anything that we've worked with before, but it was required on the plan. You just have to be really careful how you handle it. It's acoustical sealant that never cures, and it's really sticky and really gooey. So if you get it anywhere, it's going to get everywhere.
Tell me an honest opinion. How is it to work with acoustical sealant?
Messy, it comes to mind, of course. Sticky, messy. It never sets up. It never cures. Which it doesn't get hard or crack, so you never get air leakage through it. So now I understand it, but I ruined a lot of clothes.
I had it on all my wrenches that we used to tighten down the anchor bolts with. It was on shoes. It ended up, in my truck. It ended up in my house.
How many pairs of pants?
At least 3.
Any tricks to getting it off?
Goof off.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they're done.
It ended up in a lot of strange places. It lasts forever.
Is Tremco really the best product for this job, or is it just cruel and unusual punishment?
I gotta willingly admit that there is a fun side to using Tremco. While it does work perfect for the job and it's a job well done, there is something very entertaining about watching these guys mess with it.
So why did you spec the EPDM gasket?
The client here is a retired engineer, so he scrutinizes everything in his life too. And he felt that the perpetuality of the acoustical sealant might not exist. And he was looking for an alternative, and so to satisfy his needs psychologically, and it really didn't have an effect on what I was doing. We picked and chose where we were going to use the EPDM gasket, and we synchronized it with use with the acoustical sealant. So I kind of got a belt and suspenders approach and made the client happy, and got a successful detail out of it. So it was kind of a win-win-win.
What about the termite shield? That was a last-minute addition, right?
Yeah, so, it's one of those last-minute calls I get from the client that says, hey, what about a termite shield? I've been reading up, and, we should have a termite shield in there. So we scrambled and got some termite shield and just made it another layer of the sandwich in the mud sill there. It added maybe another bead of caulk of the acoustical sealant, but it wasn't a problem.
Weren't you worried about the thermal conductivity? I mean, copper is pretty conductive.
Yeah, later, after we did it and we were able to actually realistically scrutinize the detail, we actually ended up abandoning the connection to the slab because of the thermal conductivity.
So you trimmed it on the inside.
So we trimmed it on the inside. So while it battles above the concrete wall, that's kind of where it ends.
So what purpose did the poly serve?
First, it becomes a capillary break on the top of the wall. I mean, I have a wood frame wall on top of concrete wicks water. The poly becomes a barrier between the wood frame and the concrete wall and stops any moisture leak.
Okay.
In addition to the capillary action, the poly actually drapes down 2 feet so that later it can come across the top of the foam, and we can lap it with our under slab poly and maintain our secondary air barrier in a continuous fashion.
Next time, we'll fast forward to learn the theory behind this super insulated slab and see how the builders fared as they put Steve's design in the ground.